My husband made me sign away my $2.5 million penthouse and my family heirlooms. He told me it was only paperwork to protect our future. He smiled, held my hand, and promised nothing would change. I believed him. I had no idea that one simple signature would almost erase my entire life, and that his own lawyer would later be the reason everything turned around. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Maribel Lawson. I married Graham Whitlock because he felt safe. He spoke softly, dressed well, and always acted like he knew what was best for us. When my grandmother passed away, she left me the penthouse she worked her whole life for. She also left me jewelry and old keepsakes that had been in our family longer than I had been alive. Those things were not just expensive. They were memories, love, and history. At first, Graham acted supportive. He said he was proud of me. But slowly his tone changed. He started warning me about dangers I had never thought of. He talked about people who might try to take advantage of me. He said owning so much as a woman could make me a target. He said marriage meant sharing responsibility, and that I shouldn't carry stress alone. One evening, he brought papers home. He said it was a smart move, something married couples do all the time. He explained it fast, using words that sounded official and serious. He told me his lawyer had prepared everything, and that it was urgent. I asked if I should get my own lawyer. He laughed gently and said that would only waste money and show I didn't trust him. I felt uncomfortable, but I also felt guilty for doubting my own husband. He reminded me how much he had done for me, how he had always stood by my side. So I signed. The next week, we went to his lawyer's office. The place was quiet and cold. The lawyer, a man named Ellis Crown, barely looked at me. Graham answered questions for me before I could speak. I remember wanting to read more carefully, but Graham squeezed my hand under the table. The lawyer hesitated for a second, then continued. I didn't know it then, but that moment changed everything. I walked out thinking I had protected my future. In reality, I had just handed it away. That night, Graham slept peacefully. I didn't. Something inside me felt wrong, like I had locked a door and lost the key without knowing it. After the papers were signed, life did not go back to normal. It quietly shifted in ways I could not explain at first. Graham became different. He watched everything more closely. He asked where I was going, who I spoke to, and how often I visited the penthouse. He said it was just concern, but it felt like supervision. The penthouse had always been my place of comfort. Every corner reminded me of my grandmother. The windows, the quiet mornings, the old wooden cabinet where she kept her letters and jewelry. Before the paperwork, I went there whenever I wanted. Afterward, Graham always came with me, or found reasons why I should not go alone. He said it was safer that way. He also started talking about money more than before. Not in a greedy way, but in a calculated way. He would mention maintenance costs, insurance, and how expensive it was to keep old items safe. When I talked about my grandmother's jewelry, he said maybe it was better stored elsewhere. He said emotions should not control financial decisions. I began to feel small. I had always been independent, but suddenly I was asking permission without realizing it. If I questioned him, he would sigh and say he was only trying to protect our marriage. He said stress could ruin everything if we were not careful. One afternoon, I decided to check something simple. I called the building office of the penthouse to ask about a small repair. The woman on the phone paused and said she could not speak to me about the property. She told me only the legal owner could approve changes. I laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. When I told Graham about it that night, his face did not change. He calmly said everything was under the trust now, just like he explained before. He said this was normal and that I was overthinking. But he did not give me any documents when I asked. He said they were with the lawyer. Days passed, and the feeling in my chest grew heavier. I went back to the penthouse alone one morning. The doorman looked confused when I greeted him. He checked his screen twice before letting me in. That look told me more than words ever could. Inside, I opened the cabinet where my grandmother's jewelry was kept. It was empty. The space where the velvet boxes sat was bare. My hands started shaking. I called Graham, but he did not answer. When he finally did, he said the items were moved for safekeeping. He said I should have told him before going there alone. That was the moment I understood something was very wrong. This was no longer about protection. This was control. That night, I did not cry. I sat quietly and replayed every conversation, every smile, every time I ignored my own doubts. I realized trust had blinded me. And once I saw that truth, I knew I could never unsee it. I waited a few days before confronting him. I needed to be sure of what I felt, because once I spoke, there would be no going back. When I finally asked Graham directly if I still owned the penthouse and my heirlooms, he didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He simply told me everything was under his control now, and that this was how responsible marriages worked. He said I was too emotional to manage assets like that. He said my grandmother had lived in a different time, and that sentiment had no place in modern life. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. That calmness hurt more than anger would have. I asked him why he rushed me, why he didn't let me get my own lawyer. He smiled and said because I would have complicated things. He said love meant trust, and I had proven mine when I signed. That sentence stayed in my head all night. I realized he never saw me as a partner. He saw me as something to manage. I barely slept. The next morning, I went back to the lawyer's office alone. I didn't tell Graham. When I asked to see Ellis Crown, the receptionist hesitated but let me in. Ellis looked surprised to see me. For the first time, he actually listened. I told him everything slowly and carefully. I told him how I was pressured, how I was rushed, how I was discouraged from reading or asking questions. His face changed. He didn't interrupt me. When I finished, he leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. Then he said something I never expected. He said he had been uncomfortable that day. He said the trust was legal on paper, but the way it was done was wrong. He told me Graham had structured things to benefit himself completely. He also told me Graham had made a mistake. One clause was written in a way that could be challenged, especially if coercion could be proven. Ellis said he could not represent me officially yet, but he told me exactly what evidence would matter. I walked out of that office feeling weak, but hopeful for the first time in weeks. I didn't confront Graham again. Instead, I watched him. I listened. I let him believe I had accepted everything. I started writing things down. Dates. Words. Moments when he slipped and admitted too much. At night, I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear. During the day, I acted normal. He grew more confident, more careless. He thought I was broken. He thought I had given up. But inside, something had changed. I was no longer afraid of losing what he took from me. I was afraid of losing myself if I did nothing. I stayed quiet for a long time after that. On the outside, I was the same wife he expected me to be. I cooked, listened, and nodded when he spoke. On the inside, I was collecting pieces of the truth. Every conversation became important. Every sentence mattered. Graham started talking more freely once he believed I had accepted my place. He complained about the paperwork, about how stressful it was to manage everything alone. Sometimes he would joke about how lucky he was that things worked out in his favor. He didn't realize how much he was revealing. I kept notes hidden where he would never look. I wrote down dates and exact words. When he mentioned moving the heirlooms again, I asked simple questions and let him explain. He liked explaining. It made him feel powerful. And every explanation became proof. Ellis and I spoke only a few times, carefully and briefly. He told me to stay patient. He said the law moves slowly, but mistakes leave deep marks. The more Graham talked, the more those marks showed. I learned that silence can be louder than shouting. Months passed. Graham grew comfortable, even careless. He stopped pretending his actions were for my benefit. He talked about plans that did not include me. He made decisions without asking, assuming I would never challenge him. In his mind, the story was already over. Then one morning, I was served official court papers. Graham was trying to lock everything in permanently. He thought this move would scare me. Instead, it gave me exactly what I needed. It forced everything into the open. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Graham sat across from me with that same calm expression. He didn't look at me once. He was certain the law was on his side. Ellis entered the room last. When Graham saw him, his face tightened just for a second. When proceedings began, Ellis did something Graham never expected. He spoke about the trust, about the rushed signing, about the pressure. Then he asked Graham to explain why my name had been removed from key decisions immediately after the papers were signed. Graham answered confidently at first. Then Ellis asked one simple question. He asked why I was never advised to seek independent counsel, despite the size and personal nature of the assets involved. The room went quiet. Graham opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his own lawyer, waiting for help that never came. For the first time, I saw fear on his face. I took the stand after that. My voice shook at first, but I kept going. I spoke about my grandmother, about trust, about how love had been used against me. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't beg. I just told the truth. And that truth was heavier than anything Graham had prepared for. The judge listened without interrupting. When Graham tried to speak again, his confidence was gone. His answers became short and defensive. He contradicted himself more than once, and each mistake felt like a crack spreading across something he had built so carefully. Ellis presented the document slowly, pointing out the clause Graham had altered at the last moment. It gave him control but failed to protect the trust if pressure or manipulation could be proven. Graham stared at the papers like he was seeing them for the first time. He had been so focused on winning that he missed his own error. When the ruling came, it was calm and firm. The trust was declared invalid. The assets were ordered to be returned to me. Control of the penthouse and the heirlooms was restored immediately. Graham was warned that further attempts to interfere would carry serious consequences. Graham didn't react at first. Then his shoulders dropped. The man who once spoke for me now couldn't find words for himself. He looked smaller, like the confidence had drained out of him all at once. The process didn't end that day, but the power shifted. He moved out soon after. There were no dramatic arguments, no apologies. Just silence. I packed my things and returned to the penthouse alone. The space felt different, but safe. Mine again. When the heirlooms were returned, I opened each box slowly. My grandmother's rings, her necklace, the watch she gave my grandfather. I cried then, not from sadness, but from relief. Those items had survived generations. They had survived him too. Graham lost more than money. He lost access to me, to my trust, to the life he tried to control. His name became just another line in legal records. He no longer had a voice in my future. I learned something painful but important. Betrayal does not always come with anger. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in calm words and gentle smiles. And revenge does not always need noise. Sometimes it is simply standing still while the truth does the work. I didn't win by becoming someone else. I won by remembering who I already was. After everything was over, the quiet felt strange. For a long time, my life had been full of tension, careful words, and fear of saying the wrong thing. Now there was space. Too much space at first. I would wake up and expect to feel anxious, but instead there was a calm I wasn't used to. Living alone in the penthouse felt different than before. It wasn't just a place anymore. It felt like a promise I had kept to myself. Every room reminded me that I survived something that could have broken me. I didn't rush to change anything. I let the space breathe with me. People think revenge is loud. They imagine anger, shouting, or someone being destroyed in public. For me, revenge was quiet. It was walking freely. It was making decisions without fear. It was knowing that someone who tried to erase me failed completely. Graham never reached out again. And I was grateful for that. I didn't need closure from him. The truth was enough. I saw him clearly in the end, and once you truly see someone, they lose their power over you. I learned to trust myself again, slowly. I stopped blaming myself for believing in love. Trusting someone is not weakness. Using that trust against someone is. That difference matters. Sometimes I hold my grandmother's jewelry and think about the strength of the women before me. They survived harder things in quieter ways. I like to believe they would be proud of me, not because I won, but because I didn't disappear. My story didn't end with him losing everything. It ended with me keeping myself. And that was always the part that mattered most.